key differences between the US and the UK on counterterrorism in a post 9/11, post 7/7 context, for me, have really come down to differences in civil rights and civil liberties kinds of enforcement. The UK was more willing to regulate controversial views, extremist views, even if those views weren't violent or hadn't led to any criminal activity. So people that just had extremist views, extremist thoughts, were being focused on and targeted and regulated. And by contrast, the US was not inclined to do that. I think that the UK's experience with the Northern Ireland Troubles factors into the mix. The US has not had to deal with a 30 years conflict like the Troubles. So the US is still kind of figuring its way out as it pertains to counterterrorism enforcement. The concept of British values has now become intertwined with counterterrorism, policy making, and rhetoric. So what we have, particularly in the UK and to a lesser extent in the US, is this notion that those that wish to engage in thoughts or views that are extreme are somehow not adhering to British values, are not part of mainstream thought, and are outsiders. These are folks that are basically not welcome if their views are not adhering to mainstream values. Now, who defines British values? That's unclear. What exactly are British values? That's also a bit unclear. But it certainly has become the rhetoric around which counterterrorism policy has justified many of the expansions, particularly in the past few years. I think that you have Muslim populations in the UK that tend, with the levels of deprivation that we see economically and segregation, there's a disproportionality of alienation and disconnectedness from mainstream views, feeling traditionally marginalized. It's a real contrast to the US. US data doesn't indicate the same level of marginalization amongst US Muslims it does with UK Muslims. And I think that that's one factor that helps shape UK counterterrorism policy in ways that's different from the US. It's not the only factor, but it's something worth considering. I think that the rhetoric that you see talking about UK Muslim populations in relation to terrorism has now taken the language of integration. It's really called into question the UK brand of multiculturalism. What I actually found is that the blurring of boundaries between the state of emergency and non-emergency were very parallel between the US and the UK. So what I found was that in each instance, there was a long pre-9/11 track record of instituting states of emergency, and with that, erosions of civil liberties, expansions of police powers, and new counterterrorism legislation. What I found in the post-9/11 context, which was the focus of my study, was that both the US and the UK similarly instituted states of emergency that have yet to go away. So despite having had well-established counterterrorism laws in place and police powers in place before 9/11, in both instances, both the US and the UK further expanded counterterrorism laws and police powers in ways that have not since been rolled back. And I don't think that these states of emergency will be rolled back anytime soon, so long as there's a perception that the Al-Qaeda or now ISIS-inspired terrorism threat remains key threats to both countries.